All right, and I do believe we have everything. Yep, everything is. We are live now. So welcome once again to Youth Rugby Discussion. We are a podcast focusing on youth rugby union in the U.S., mostly in New England, because that's where we are. We're a collection of current and past coaches, administrators, or parents involved in youth rugby. Now, a key thing, a key thing for every discussion, and particularly this one, is although some of us might sit on different boards and perhaps coach under different organizations, we do not speak for any of these boards or any of these organizations. This is us doing our best to discuss youth rugby and move it forward and find the interesting gems in there, of which we continue to find many. So please join us. Today we're going to be discussing how to start a new high school team. And there's a lot to unravel in there. There's a lot of layers to get at. Particularly, we need to sort of define what do we mean by that? Because there is a high school based club or a team that is associated with a high school, and then there also exists a club-based team also serving youth of the same ages, but that's not associated with a high school, with a club in itself. So we'll do our best to be able to speak to the two, and let's see if we can learn more about these two different animals. So let's just from the top down, let's just identify our voices so everybody knows who's talking. Alan, you want to get us going?
Yes, sorry, this is Coach Allen with the Rentham Barbarians, and I coach a high school club team.
This is Chris, former player, coach, ref. Now mostly I am a rugby dad, but among other things.
And you heard me. My name is Daniel. I do not coach high school yet, but I probably will at some point soon.
Jeff Karras, I'm president of Rugby Rhode Island, which is the Ocean State's state-based organization. I'm also a coach and rugby dad.
And this is Kate McCabe, and I'm most often affiliated with Belmont High School girls rugby team.
I'm Matt Pamela. I'm the head coach of Marshfield High School rugby, and also a board member for the South Shore Anchors rugby that has a youth side.
And I am Skylar. I play for a high school club team, the Boston Irish Wolfhounds.
Fantastic. So does somebody want to get us started with sort of understanding a little bit of the differences between when we say a school-based versus a club-based team?
Yes.
Yeah, Kate, please.
Sure. I think if you think back to maybe the origin of rugby, right? Rugby clubs have existed certainly across British Commonwealth states, right? This idea of a community-based organization that potentially has multiple sides, adult sides, youth sides, and doesn't pull from any particular school system, but rather pulls from a community and might be more closely associated with a region. And I think when we're talking about, I can see Alan is saying it did certainly start in schools, particularly probably prep schools. Is that right, Alan?
Well, they actually started in a school called Rugby, in a town called Rugby,
Right.
which you can probably gather it gets its name from. But yeah, Rugby schools famously was where the game was very first played, where William Webb Ellis allegedly, though I think fairly now or proven to be false, picked up a soccer ball and ran with it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, the concept of the game, sorry to interrupt, was very much tied into English prep schools, British prep schools, where the goal was to breed the next generation of leaders by giving them a pretty tough team game to play, where they had to be physically tough and mentally tough and work together. Anyway, let me shut up and let you carry on with your
No. So
your
maybe in
discourse.
that transition from talking about clubs, which are most often, or how we're going to probably refer to them as community-based organizations, like maybe that Alan's, your point transitions us nicely into school-based organizations, right? So when we talk about that, we're talking about high school programs that are affiliated to a single school. And that means all the players that are in that program belong to a single school. and the name of that club is associated with that school. It falls within the athletic organization of that school system, and thus, is subject to the rules and procedures of that school system. Is that a good breakdown, guys?
There's a little bit more clarification, though, Kate.
Sure.
And because we're in a different place here in Rhode Island, and we've also, we've done some playing down in Connecticut where it's a very different model than Massachusetts. So there's a distinction we need to make between the governing bodies. Some governing bodies are the state's athletic association, which is highly regulated. Some governing bodies are the USA Rugby state governing bodies. And some are just a club organization, and they are loosely associated with what the state-based organization is doing. Connecticut, for example, is almost all school-based, but it's not athletic association. Massachusetts has the athletic association for the school-based and the state-based organization under USA Rugby running the clubs, and the two can mix, but not for some things like championships and that kind of stuff. And in Rhode Island, we're just trying to build either one that'll work, but we're not under the Rhode Island Interscholastic League. We're trying to build both high school teams and club teams wherever it'll take a foothold and grow.
And that's a great distinction, right? That's absolutely fantastic. And Matt, I think I cut you off. Making the distinction that if you're at club level, in some places, if you're at club level, if you're a high school kid playing for a club, or you're a high school kid playing for a high school, in some states, those all kind of in an organizational structure, kind of all answer to the same governing body that would be ultimately tied to USA Rugby. Now, Massachusetts is really interesting that they don't necessarily all both tie to USA Rugby, right? One goes in one direction towards scholastics, and the other one could go towards USA Rugby. Matt, sorry, I cut you off. Is that where you were going to chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so obviously that you have school-based teams and then club-based teams, but the governing body is a really important factor, especially if you're considering starting a new team, which I think is really kind of what we want to focus on today. Knowing who is going to, or if anybody is going to be a governing body over your team and what their rules are is like a really important place to start.
Absolutely, and also like who is responsible, or who is empowered, or where is it most likely? Who is more likely to feel responsible for starting a new club? Do we want to start talking about that? Like who, under all the models, who is responsible, or who has brought it onto their charter to start a new club? Because I think there's some really big differences there, right? There's certain it'd be neat to know if there's certain gaps and if the different bodies, if they treat it differently, can they complement one another? Do we want to start with that? Like who's responsible, and what do you do if you want to be able to satisfy these three different flavors of starting a new club? Does that work?
Can I actually kind of, I know this is maybe, I don't know if this exactly fits what you're saying here, Dan, but I'm wondering if it's possible, because Matt, you probably have the oldest program as my guess at Marshfield. And part of what I'm wondering is there's so many different ways to like start a program. And like, I would love to hear how Marshfield itself evolved, right? Because I know that it's entirely different from the way that Belmont girls evolved, right? Like, and through that conversation, through hearing like about one club's process, I think we're going to uncover so many pieces of the equation.
So actually all of youth rugby in New England, whether you're talking youth, middle school, high school, any of that, all really goes back to two guys, Larry Small and Ian Ryrie. who were teammates and played on a couple different Boston clubs because some of the clubs shifted around and merged and split and whatever. But they were teammates, and they both happened to be teachers. And I don't know what motivated them or got them started, but they each started high school programs. So Ann Ryrie founded the Brookline High School rugby team, and Larry Small, so that was in 81, and Larry Small founded the Marshfield High School rugby team in 82. And both basically just kind of grew their own club and then would play each other once in a while, and then eventually moved on, did a lot in the 80s, did a fair amount of touring, actually. I have a whole bunch of touring plaques from Marshfield High School in the 80s. That faded off as lawyers became more involved in the 90s and 2000. But so I played for Marshfield for Larry in the early 90s, and then went off and played at BU, and then through a weird course, eventually got a job teaching at Marshfield High School. And literally the minute after I got hired, he had me on the phone. He's like, "Matt, I could really use a hand coaching. I know you're playing again." And I was young and very enthusiastic for it. So he administrated the team, and all I did was do the on the field coaching. And they'd had a rough couple of years, the 2 years prior to when I came aboard. And they were really desperate to be successful. So my approach was that I was also a coach of the high school wrestling team. So my approach was that I was going to treat it like a varsity program. We were gonna ditch the 2-day-a-week model that that Marshfield High School had been using, and that that my college team used and that men's teams used. And we were going to go to the 5-day-a-week model that the other high school teams used. I very much wanted to treat at this point, it was a school club, like the drama club or chess club. And I wanted to treat it very much like all of the other teams were treated, to try and earn the respect the other teams got. So we went to 5 days a week. My first year there, we won the New England's. I think we won it again my third or fourth year there. It was just a tournament hosted by Amoskeag back in the day. That invited all of the New England programs and a couple from New York, actually. And sometimes there was one or two from Canada as well. So at that point, the next year, Larry retired, and I became like the person in charge. And at that point, there was no rugby governing body. The only governance I had was the school, who was treating us like a club. So I had actually a lot of flexibility, which was really good. I still had to maintain grades, and if kids got disciplined in school, it had repercussions on their participation. But it was pretty easy. All I had to do was sip, and then we were good.
Can I interrupt for a second, Matt?
Absolutely.
I have a question. Like, you're starting to answer something that I'm interested in. Like, was it run through the athletic director? Did you have to, did you get your fields? Did you get a budget from that? Did you externally fundraise? Like, how did that happen?
This is a public school budget.
I know.
Yeah. So at that point at Marshfield High School, all clubs that had met a requirement, a minimum number of students, which I think was like 20 or something, got $400. Larry used to use it to buy balls and cones and stuff like that, and ended up using a lot of his own money pretty much every single season. He was losing money into this, not making money out of it. And as a club, technically, the only person I reported to was the high school principal. But to organize field time, I had to work with the athletic director, which was tough because he was also the football coach and had a very, very poor opinion of rugby. But I played football for him, and my first 3 or 4 years teaching, I coached football for him. So I think I was able to improve that some, not to the point where anything became easy, but at least workable. And it was tough. So what we did at that point, what we were doing was kids joined. Kids had to pay dues to the club, which I used to try and keep around $100. The school gave us a little tiny bit of money. And then we would use all of that money to pay for refs, balls, cones, I would line the field because the school wouldn't do it for us. I would have to organize buses and pay for buses. Once we got big enough, the school realized like, oh man, you guys are traveling. And I mean, we traveled everywhere. We used to play Fairfield, which was 3 hours away. And so the school's like, you can't have students driving. Either you need all parents or you need to do buses, which became a very big expense very quickly. So then we started doing some fundraising stuff. And then Larry's last year at Marshfield, he went to the school committee and campaigned to get rugby treated like a varsity sport. They refused to make it a varsity sport because it wasn't MIAA recognized, which is the governing body for Massachusetts high school interscholastics. But they decided they put the coaches on the varsity coaching pay scale, and it changed the way buses were funded and a lot of other things that made my life a heck of a lot easier. That was in 2004, I want to say. Unfortunately, there was a huge budget crunch in 2007, and all of that stayed on the books but became unfunded, which was a whole different problem you really get into. Then eventually Myro came along, which I'll be honest with you, Myro blindsided us. At this point in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, there were 15 or 16 high school boys clubs, most of them school-based, a couple of them town-based. And when Myro formed, none of us knew anything about it until we got this one email like, hey, we're now your boss. Come to this meeting, which was probably not the best way to start that relationship. So then we were run by Myro for a number of years, where same deal was we still had to SIP, and as a team, as a coach, each player, which in a high school is really challenging. Because ultimately, SIP really is just membership into USA Rugby, and it includes some level of insurance. But as a high school run program, we already had better insurance than that. So why, it was a big friction with my parents and with my administration against Myro and USA Rugby and paying SIP. They're like, why are we paying this? We already have like 100% coverage for like everything. And I just tried to keep convincing, like, look, it's not really a huge amount of money, and we just kind of have to do it. So that was a challenge for a long time. And then, in my opinion, luckily, the MIAA decided to recognize rugby as a high school sport, which in the school setting it's a real blessing. Part of the problem all of my years up until MIAA recognition was convincing the athletes in the building that rugby was legit. Which when I played, we practiced 2 days a week. So most of the real athletes in the building, you only do 2 days a week. It's like a hobby or something, right? Like it's, whatever. It's kind of a joke because you're only going 2 days a week and we're all going 5 or 6 days a week. Like, so when I came in, I changed it to 5 to try and eliminate that stigma. And then, but then once we got MIAA recognition, I could immediately just stomp on that anytime somebody started saying that, like, no, we're MIAA recognized. We're legit. To give you an idea of the headaches I used to face, my senior year of high school was the first year Marshfield had a club lacrosse program. At that point, we'd had a high school rugby program for 13 or 14 years. When I came back as a teacher, lacrosse was varsity with a full varsity team, 2 JV teams, and a freshman team, all fully taken care of by the athletic department. And rugby was in the exact same place it was when I left. When I graduated, it had made no progress whatsoever. So now that we have MIAA, we've made a ton of progress. I was up to 70 boys for probably 4 or 5 years, which is a problem. It's a challenge, but I feel like the more kids you can get into the program, the more kids you can get into the sport, the better it is for the sport,
So I mean, like, I want to. I mean, that's a wealth of knowledge right there, Matt.
I was trying to keep it.
No, it's amazing, but it's like I do want to talk about the MIAA. Like, I want us to talk about it, but I also feel like if we're talking about the beginning of clubs, or like, and especially that piece where you were talking about like when the MIAA or a state-based organization, right, came into play, what kinds of things, like part of what you brought up in your story was like discussing the not the MIAA, discussing Miro with your athletic director and your parents, like how to explain USA Rugby and Miro's role in your club. Like that's something that, like, regardless of how a program comes into existence today, like, discussion is something. And Jeff, I feel like I kind of want to, like, I hope you'll talk in a minute about how you're starting to make your programs, or like not make, but develop programs across Rhode Island, because it's a very similar kind of, you're at the beginning of that piece. It's like how to discuss a state-based organization within, and, you know, like the context of an athletic director and a bunch of parents and all those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you need to, there's so much that goes into starting a new program, and one of the things is like find out who your organizing body is going to be, find out the rules, but then you need to sell that organizing body to your customers, to your players and their parents, and if you're in a school, possibly to your athletic director and your principal as well.
So what's interesting though is that the athletic association is not going to start by saying, let's create rugby teams. There has to be the interest of the kids playing, and you only do that by starting with the embryonic clubs that are out there.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. All right, I'm willing to hear an alternative viewpoint, but it's been my experience with my own state that it's not in their interest to start it. It competes with all the other programs that are out there, and I have to demonstrate the need and the enthusiasm at the kid level in order for them to even have a conversation.
Yeah, I think so. I've only lived in Massachusetts, so the MIAA is the only scholastic athletic association I've worked with, and yeah, it's not. They make no effort whatsoever to grow any sport at all. All they do is govern. The MIAA, and I assume other athletic associations in other states, it's literally just school principals and school athletic directors. So they're not interested in growing any sport. That's not really their agenda. If there is a sport with enough interest, they're happy to govern it, which you can say is good or bad. I say yes and no because maybe I misinterpreted you, but what I feel like you were saying is that to have a team, you have to start as a club for working under Miro or the other SROs. And then when you get big enough, approach your school and try and get recognition that way. And that is not the only road. I mean, there's Hanover in Massachusetts started in the school as a school team. Weymouth started in the school as a school team. I'd say starting as a town-based club and growing a little bit before you become a school team is definitely an avenue and probably a little bit more common. But you can just straight up.
I think you misunderstood me, Matt. What I was trying to say is that for a state like Rhode Island that has, we only have one team that's played outside of the state its entire existence. That Rhode Island Interscholastic League isn't going to decide to offer rugby for every school in Rhode Island. There has to be the interest first at the groundswell, just like there was with lacrosse and other sports. And then you approach them and say, we have enough critical mass that we want to be recognized and governed by the athletic association. Because there's a level of legitimacy within the particularly public school realm that you absolutely need there.
Yeah,
Jeff, when you
And that I really want to hear more about because Jeff, I think my jaw dropped when I heard that last year you were able to gain enough interest from enough people to start not just one high school team, not just two high school teams, but more than that. And the thing that I also want to make clear is this entire time we've been talking about high school aged a high school age team that's associated with a high school, right? Because if we're talking
Right.
about a club team, I don't need to worry about a athletic director. I don't need to worry about any of that. I, as an individual, as a citizen, can just put up flyers and say, "Hey, I'm starting a new high school aged club." If I'm attaching it to the club that I play with, then all I have to do is just get the buy-in from the club, the president of my club, maybe some money from the treasurer, some space, that kind of stuff. So this entire time we've been talking about tying it to a high school, which has its benefits. Both I think have their benefits. I think one huge benefit with starting a club at a high school is that you have a huge pool of potential players available to you to get interest. Whereas if you're doing it as a club organization, maybe that's not the case. Like, what do you need? You need to go put flyers around the place. You need to tap parents, current players to try to get interest from their kids if they have kids around that same age. So I love the high school because you have a captive audience. And I think Matt, sort of tying into what you were talking about and then leading into Jeff's discussion, or what I want to hear from Jeff is, Jeff, what's your perspective? What did you do to be able to get such success? Because I don't see that many new clubs being created in one year anywhere. And you did it in Rhode Island. Like, who did you talk to? How did you get athletic? Who were your who helped you, and who were the
Yeah.
hurdles? Right?
So so I couldn't predict, and I couldn't give you any formula because it was different with every organization and everybody I talked to. One of the real challenges we have in Rhode Island and some other states who are trying to grow this might see the same thing. I originally thought that there would be a lot of kids who'd want to play rugby in high school. When I got to talk to some athletic directors, particularly in outside of Providence, which is our main city, and everything else is suburban, there are far too many schools for the population base. So, for instance, on Aquidneck Island here, and with the three towns we have, each town has their own high school, and they can barely each field a football team. So, I was thinking there were much more kids looking for an opportunity than there were out there. So that was one of the things that surprised me first, is that for some of these athletic directors, when I'd go to talk to him, he said, "I just don't have the kids. I'm having a hard time fielding a team for any sport I have here." And part of this is also, kids are more online and more sedentary, and it's a general case that there aren't as many kids looking to do that. Perhaps, I don't know, but so I saw many different things. So, for example, I had the um, and that's the other thing. And kids are much more specialized in what they're doing. They're on traveling teams if they're out of season for baseball and hockey. Thanks, Kate, for bringing that up. The kids are really oversubscribed in some places, but I also, for example, had an athletic director come to me, and it was actually in a more populous part of the state where their kids were looking for more opportunities. And he came to me and he said, "I've got kids who want to play rugby. Can you start a team?" And so that was a wonderful
Hmm.
experience. There are two towns in northwestern Rhode Island, Smithfield and Situate. One of our Bishop Hendricken players who played at Iona and who was a U19 for USA Rugby, and a really good player. His nephews went to the Smithfield High School, and they wanted to start a team, but there weren't enough kids. But I knew that the principal of Situate right next door was a rugby player in high school. So I went to him and I said, "What do you say we get both teams together, both schools together and field a team?" We did that. So, anything I could think to do to get the school started. And the other thing that makes it easy is we're trying to start with sevens rather than 15s. So all I need is 9 kids to get going. And so that seemed to be the right size entry point, knowing that if I could get the kids playing sevens, it wasn't a big leap to next season around growing to 15s, and that's in fact what happened with Pilgrim, which was the school that came to me and said, "Will you build a team?" So I was able to get almost 6 teams for last season before COVID hit, but it was beg, borrow, and steal. It was the same story going into talking to athletic directors. I realized quickly that that wasn't necessarily the route to success. The route to success was to find the kids and then run interference with the administration, because that's the real obstacle. Not because they don't want kids to have a good opportunity. It's because there's so many things they have to juggle, and this was just another thing on their plate. So I would always go in, and I think one of the really good things about the athletic associations, the state-based athletic associations, is there a known quantity for governance with the parents and the administration. So I would go in and I would say that I comport with all Rhode Island Interscholastic League requirements, and then some. We're also U.S. Olympic Committee, so we are more stringent in many places. So don't worry about it. We have oversight. There's a state-based body. There's a national body. There are rules, and we follow all the interscholastic rules, even though we don't have to. And that would placate some of the criticism. And others, they just looked at me and said, good luck. There's not enough money. There's not enough kids. You can try it if you like, but I think you're going to fail. And so, I usually didn't take that as a no, particularly if I had kids who wanted to play. And I was hoping that funny little ball that rolls around the field that just makes kids want to get out there and play would be the sales point. And it was in many cases, just getting them out there, just getting them to play, just having them have their first rugby experience and have them bring their buddies along next time around was a big plus. I will say that female rugby adults were my biggest cheerleaders and my biggest helpers. Male rugby adults, they seem to be too busy to want to help.
Boo.
And so, across the board, it's a real challenge. But once you get a foothold, so the bright spot in Rhode Island is Bishop Hendricken, been around for 20 years. They tour every year. They play at a pretty high level, and they have a friendly every year with Boston College High. We played down in the Connecticut League. Pretty good level program, sending kids to go play at places like Iona and St. Bonaventure's and other places, St. Mary's, and some pretty good athletes. But we're kind of special in that we're not limited by, it's a parochial school, so we're not limited by the local school board boundaries for where we draw our players from. And that's what been one of the biggest things I've found, is that there just aren't the kids in some places to get this to take off like we think it might.
So if I was writing down a recipe for the things that work well for starting a new club, I heard don't go to the small high schools. That makes sense. You need a big enough pool of players, of people,
Yeah.
to get players out of it. Start with sevens. It's easier to get started. Work from the inside. Get some kids already interested to help you work from the inside. The fourth one was present yourself to the administration and make it clear that you are satisfying the different guidelines required. And Matt, I mean, you were talking about how you operated under 3 different eras, right? The what was it? The no guidelines, the Miro guide. So USA guidelines only. Then the Miro, which I guess would be, what would that be? That would be the club, the local organization for rugby, and then later the scholastic organization. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah. So I mean, initially, technically, NERFU was my governing body, but they didn't care about us, which was fine by us and them. And then then Miro, then MIAA. And I gotta tell you, the stuff Jeff listed off, like, that's gold. And the fact that he was able to do it in so many places is truly amazing. I think the only thing I would probably add to his list is having a really enthusiastic coach.
Yeah.
Like,
And that's
And
really
more
been
to that,
around
challenge.
here, we've had a couple schools try and start programs, student based, where so I coach wrestling, so I get to know all these wrestlers in these other neighboring communities, and they know that I also coach rugby, and a lot of my wrestlers play rugby for me, and we'll do in halftime of tournaments, we'll throw a rugby ball around, and kids from other schools will hop in and be like, oh, we want to start a team. And the problem, finding a coach is a challenge, and it goes, I think, a little bit back to what you were saying about it's the MIAA or any interscholastic athletic association. It's not really in their charter to work to create new programs. I think Myro works at it, but it's a big deal. I think really the onus for creating new youth and high school programs needs to fall on the adult clubs and their older and retiring players, or
Yeah.
even their younger players if they have a job that makes it work.
So let me be even more specific, though. I actually have a flyer that I would hand to kids who are interested. So whether I'd see them at the Fort Adams thing or I'd find out that somebody wanted to start a team, onesies and twosies, they'd come to me. And so I ended up getting this handout because I wanted them to start leading the charge, because I already knew going in at the administration level without players there was a non-starter. So the first thing on the flyer says, it says, how do I start my own rugby team? Number one, find some players. And then I tell them, how many you need and what they might be and where you might find them. And, even if you got 3 or 4, let's just get started. The second thing is you need a coach, but don't worry if you can't find one right away. I'll find one for you. Just let me know you got enough kids and I'll get you a coach. And so if we're at that level, then the next step is to get permission from your school to form a club. You can have, like you said, Matt, you can have a chess club or a theater club or anything like that. So I will run the interference. I'll put on my blue blazer and my little USA Rugby pin and a striped tie and go in and talk to the administration and tell them that there's some legitimacy here. And then they have to register with USA Rugby, and then they can start practicing and playing rugby. So that's what I would give to the kids. The other thing I would do is give them a flyer for the parents. And I wrote a whole page about what rugby is and how they shouldn't worry about injuries as much as you'd think. It isn't as brutal, and we've tried to make it much more safe than it was when it first started in the 70s and 80s and all sorts of stuff like that. And a little bit about how to understand it and why it's important. And that, that whole thing about building leaders and having a tight-knit team that you get with rugby, I put that in there. So, to particularly for dads who had played rugby who were looking for an opportunity for their kid, but maybe the mom isn't convinced. I had to try to hit the balance between both mom and dad. So I'd hand that out at the same time. And then I'd go in to the administration. I had another handout for them that explained what USA Rugby is, who I am, what the oversight is, how it's managed in other states, and how we're growing the sport in the U.S. and how and that there's very low barriers to entry. And by the way, we have all the liability that you might need.
Jeff, can you also share the piece that you told us before about having that conversation with athletic directors about getting a teacher involved, even if they'd never played rugby, and what and why that was attractive to athletic directors when you were setting a program up?
Well, and then part of it is, particularly if it's going to be a school-based program, I know that there are opportunities in other sports for teachers to also be coaches. And so what thing we did for 2 years running, and we didn't do it this last year because of COVID, is I made sure we had a USA Rugby coaches 2000 level coaches clinic in Rhode Island, and I sent that announcement around to all the athletic directors, saying if you have any teachers that have played before, or if you have any teachers that are interested in getting this certification is coming, because for many of the teachers, a lot of the sports are already taken by other coaches, and this would be an opportunity for them to get into coaching a sport if that's what they wanted to do, particularly if they're a former rugby player.
And Jeff, you've taken this as a takeaway for you. Like this is something that you're doing because you're rugby is youth rugby. There's not a lot of it in Rhode Island, so you're kind of playing the role of the community based uh, administrator and sort of the high school governing body, right? Like um, you're taking on the role of creating new clubs. Well, partly because you see it as a vital part in something that you can do to grow rugby in general. But you're doing it because you're wearing a lot of hats all at once. Is that correct?
Well, that's true, and I'm really a force of a party of one here, an army of one. But part of it is I'm really frustrated though, and I think Matt, you hit upon it. I went in and I talked to our local club, and I briefed them on what I was doing in their annual general meeting, and a bunch of guys in the back chiped up and said, "Here, here, it's about time. This is great." And I said, "Beautiful. I need your help. Come volunteer." And nobody came up afterwards to help me volunteer. So the adult clubs are not taking this as part of their mission. And I think as I get ready for next season, I'm going to make a more concerted effort to go to the Providence and Newport clubs and say, listen, you guys are dying for membership. The membership is 5 years out, and it's in the high schools around here. You need to grow it, and you need to get involved in this. And it's not going to happen if I'm the only guy doing it, because my son's a senior now, and although I'm going to continue to fight this good fight, there's kind of there's so many years I can do this with a go to the order without much success before I may end up throwing in the towel or giving it to somebody else who's younger and more interested in doing this than I was a kid in high school. But for right now, it's really difficult to get people to want to contribute and participate and help make this happen. And I'll also say this in it's not a bad thing, but it's just the way things are. There is a really vibrant club here in Newport that is not interested in growing the game in the schools, but interested in having just one team at the high school level in Rhode Island. And that person who runs that organization is not helping me grow, and has some rugby players who would be good seeds in 4 or 5 different schools around the state to get it started. And that's one of the real challenges and the torsions between the school base and the club base, is that at this embryonic stage we're at right now, we can't do just one or just the other. We have to work together and do both, and that's not happening right now.
Yeah, I think that. So I've had a very similar experience to you. I started coaching the high school side in 2003, and I was, Jesus, what was that, like 23 years old or something like that. And at the same time, I was also a founding member of the South Shore Anchors, the local men's club. And I mean, I've literally spent every day from then till now telling the men's club, like, guys, more you need to get to do this. A, I'm having a ton of fun coaching the high school kids. But B, if you start one in the next town over, we can play each other and our kids can get that much better, and it'll be so much easier for both of us. And for my entire time playing as a men's player, and then a significant amount of time after that, same thing. Here, great idea. I love that, but nobody would actually help. What has changed that, I think, is, my men's team has recently tried to become more business-like in their organization. And what I kind of sold them on was, like, look at soccer. Youth soccer is a big business. I mean, there are professional, like, youth soccer clubs. Like, that is people's job, is I run a youth soccer club or I coach in a youth soccer club. Like, they make enough money that they have guys who, like, that's all they do is coach in youth soccer. It's not their other job. It's their only job. And there's no reason why rugby can't do that as well. I mean, lacrosse has done that, where there are people who, like, my only job is I run youth lacrosse or I coach youth lacrosse. There's no reason why rugby can't do that. It's a cash cow sitting there just waiting for somebody to build it. And not that I think we should be treating the kids like a commodity, but I think that's how you motivate the clubs to get involved in it. Number one, it's going to generate revenue for the club, but it's also going to generate players, like you were saying. The current anchors, this not fall of 2020, obviously, but fall of 2019, every week, at least a third of their starting lineup were Marshfield High School rugby alumni.
That's pretty cool. Kate, you were trying to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I think like what you guys are talking about is a whole episode. Like
Yep.
the concept of adult programs, men and women's adult programs, and why it's like why we're struggling at every level to find coaches, and how we're missing the opportunity to grow the game the way that like other sports have. Like that is a whole program, and potentially that's like we have the ability to pull in some key members of adult programs and like have this conversation on this forum, being like, this is what we're seeing, and you know what I mean? Like, so I think that's a really important piece here, and I think it's also its own issue. If that makes sense.
But Kate,
Go, Chris,
the
yep.
other thing
Sorry,
I
go,
wanted to say was that I might have sounded kind of negative in my travels throughout the state trying to make things happen. What was really gratifying to see is that I almost had 6 teams, and 3 of those were holdovers from the year before. And it doesn't take much for the flywheel to start turning and the momentum to get started and to build this up. So I am very positive about the prospects if we can just get back to it after COVID. I'm worried that this is going to be another last year because all the other high school sports have to squeeze in a season. But once this gets started again, I have no doubt it's gonna start and it's gonna go, just because how fun the game is to play and how much the kids really enjoy being part of a rugby team.
And yeah, and how much we need it right now. How much everybody needs getting out there in the camaraderie, the friendship, getting out there, running around in the fresh air, being part of a team dynamics. So, Kate, I'm totally with you. That is totally going to be an entire episode. Another one that I heard was kind of the cannibalism between the high school based and the club based, and how the two butt heads at times, and how the two maybe should be able to help one another. I think that's another great episode. But I think the last piece that I wanted to hear about here is we were coming up with a recipe of what you need in order to successfully start a new club. And one piece that I think we haven't heard, that I'd like to hear a little bit more about specifically, is coaches. We were saying there's like a choke point right now with adult teams not providing enough coaches. And again, we've been talking about high schools as opposed to clubs. For club side, I think the requirements for what it takes to be a coach are very different than high school. So I'd like to hear from you guys, because I, as a club guy, would love to be able to, and I've been asked in the past to participate and help in coaching high school. And my experience has always been, no, I can't do it. Practices are going to be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 4, or 3 to 5, 3:30 to 5, and that's when I'm working. How do high schools get their fields, get their coaches? How long, how is there a requirement for, how many practices a coach needs to be present at? Do I, as a coach, can I say,
Hey,
what? Yes.
Daniel,
Yes.
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's super important. And I just I feel like we're missing a piece of this here, which
Sure.
is creating girls' high school programs.
Oh,
Like
yes.
as in we've heard 2 boys' high school programs, and I'd kind of like to talk about the girls' high school programs.
Absolutely.
Simply because I think they can be a simpatico piece here.
Yep.
So like realistically, I'd like just to kind of bring it back that there are 2 programs in Massachusetts, and I'm really only talking about Massachusetts right now because that's all I know. But Lincoln Sudbury and Algonquin Regional High School are the 2 school-based programs that kind of jump-started girls rugby in the state. And that was started by Sarah Greeley and Emily Philbin and Lori Borden at Lincoln Sudbury, and then Algonquin, respectively. And I think those two programs essentially carried girls rugby like themselves for years. With the addition of two other ones, Newton and Needham joined in. And I coach at Belmont High School, which I will say, I didn't really start doing until about 2015. So when I started coaching, well, actually, that's kind of a misnomer. I tried to start a girls program in 2011, I think. But I was so pulled in multiple directions, and I had such a hard time getting equipment and fields and having consistent space that I couldn't keep the 7 girls that signed up coming regularly, because we couldn't get regular field space. It was a really interesting problem. And I was simultaneously playing and coaching at BU. So I was, and teaching full time. So that was pulling me in all these different ways. And it made me, when that didn't work in 2011, it made me sit there and be like, I won't do this again unless I have the support of the athletic director, the school, unless people are going to buy in. And what changed in 2015 when I started what is the still existing iteration is that I was actually I'm very close friends with Greg Bruce, who's the head coach of the Belmont boys rugby team. And, I was retiring, and he asked me out to coach the boys. He was like, will you be one of our forwards coach? And he had been asking for a while, and I was just, overcommitted. And when I said yes to that, in 2015, after retiring, he was like, great, because we also have about 5 girls that signed up this year to play. And there had always been 1 or 2 that signed up and played with the boys. But he was like, that's the biggest number. That's the biggest number of girls that we've ever had. And so it would be amazing. Maybe you could pull out those girls and start doing 7s with them once a week. It could be their time. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'm in. And the minute I committed to saying, yes, I will coach with the boys, but I will also work specifically with the girls, suddenly there were 15 girls that signed up to be on the boys rugby team. So there was a female coach that showed up for the boys rugby team, and suddenly there was a whole team worth of girls that was okay, if there's girls rugby and there's a girls rugby coach, I will play this game. And by the time we had our first practices, there were actually 19 girls that showed up. And I had to I'm a teacher, so I was quarried, and all of those things were easily workable. But I had to go in and meet with my athletic director and kind of be like, okay, this is going to be under the umbrella of the Belmont Rugby Association, which was the parent group that was created to kind of run the financial aspect of a team. But it's going to be a brand new side of that Belmont Rugby Association. And so I had to meet with the athletic director and kind of say, okay, it's our first year. What do you, what are some things that would make it easier for you to trust me as a coach or trust this program? And one of the things that he kind of said was I don't, the boys team, when they started here, ran a full season without any games. They had 1 or 2 scrimmages. And so I want the same thing for the girls team. So that first season that I had with the girls, we were run under Myro. We were a Myro team, but we didn't play any games until the very end, when my team played a 15 scrimmage with Lincoln Sudbury against their B side. But it was amazing because it was, girls and played rugby 3 times a week and did half of their training. All the non-contact stuff happened in a co-ed space. We shared all of our equipment with the boys. We split all of the field time. We did shared fitness training together. And so by the end of that, that core group became, what kind of set up the trajectory of the next 5 years of the team. And so like from that point forward, we were able to like in 2016, we played a full season. And in 2017, the MIAA became like adopted rugby into its governance, and we became one of those teams. But the reason I bring this up, because it's a little different, is that I'm a big advocate of the idea that when starting a girls rugby team, or even or starting a brand new program, it is possible to start both boys and girls together if coaches are willing to kind of work together, acknowledging that rugby has always been kind of a special sport, in that like, men and women play the same rules. They play them differently, but they play the same rules. They play with the same equipment. They play out in the same field space. And it is possible to have a really cohesive unit that like really supports each other, right? Like, and we have, brothers and sisters that have, I have a lot of my girls have come in and they've played because their brothers played. But now we have boys in the program that play because they watched their sisters play.
That is awesome.
That's so good. Yeah, coming, I play for Providence. Providence has a men's side and has a women's side, or multiple men's sides and multiple women's sides. So, this is melting my heart. This is amazing, and this is like the way it should be as far as I'm concerned. This is fantastic. So you did create a club. You did have, and you had a lot of the key things that Jeff and Matt have been talking about already there. You had the girls, you had the players on the inside pushing, saying, hey, can we have a club? You had a coach, which is fantastic. So you had a lot of the infrastructure. It's just amazing that these players just came out of the woodwork.
Yeah, but it happens so much faster. For example, if you look at like Newton, unfortunately, had a girls program and not a boys program. And it was still a really strong program. But what they struggled with was, and this is going to go back to our earlier conversation, they couldn't get consistent coaching. And so even though their athletic director was supportive, or I think maybe it was their superintendent that was supportive, like without a consistent coach, it makes it really hard to build that program in a school district, right? And whereas like on my end, like I feel like we went from having 15 players to having 50 players in 3 years. And that's not just because, like, that's not because of me. That's because there was a system, a structure in place that already understood and valued rugby, and we got to work with it, right? Like, the community knew it because they knew the boys. And so we built on that, and the girls that came in got to see it at the boys and the girls level.
Yeah. I think it's real important to have a female coach for the girls teams, just for that role model to show that it can be done. I actually started a girls team in high school at LaSalle. I had a boys team and a girls team, and they both had the same coach. And unfortunately, it was the wrong coach, and he managed to fail and not get the kids enthusiastic, and certainly not the girls enthusiastic. And probably if he had a female coach with him, I think that might have been better, at least for the girls. But, for all of this, though, coaches are really the business end of all this administration and all this effort to get it started. And once the thing starts, the sustaining part of it has to come from a good coach and a good organization at the team level. I can't do that for the schools.
So
Right.
if we're going to start, if we're talking about starting a club, I think a team, and we talked a lot of the pieces. You need a coach. Is being a key piece. How do you get a coach? How do you make a coach? How do you recruit a coach? How do you? What are the ways? What are some ways that because you need to be successful, you're going to need a coach. How can we do this? I mean, obviously, the adult side stepping up, and an old boy. I'm assuming an old boy, as opposed to somebody that's already playing, should probably old boy or old girl should stand up and say, "Hey, I've got some time on my hand. I'm not playing rugby anymore. Let me go ahead and step into this role." For a club side, which we haven't been talking about, for a club side, That's pretty straightforward. Question to you guys that are more familiar with some of the laws and regulations around a high school side. Could I go to the high school down the street and say, "Hey, I want to be your coach"? Will that fly, or do I need to be staff?
I think, you know, I think for a long time, even as late as the early 2000s, you wanted to coach rugby, like you just went and did it, and you kind of didn't really need anything. It wasn't until USA Rugby mandated you are not going to get refs unless you have a level 200 coach that it really became serious about, like, oh, I actually have to have first aid, and I have to have CPR, and I have to have the concussion awareness protocol. And I would say the requirements to be a club coach now are pretty much the same as the requirements to be a high school coach now. The only difference is that the high school is going to want a little bit more. Not more requirements, but more. The club is probably happy if you go 2 days a week. Most high schools, 2 days a week is really fringe. 4 days a week, they'd probably be happy. 5, they'd be thrilled. Which, like you said, the time commitment is an issue. Not everybody's jobs allow this.
Yep.
Luckily, nowadays, a lot of schools have fields with lights, so you don't have to practice at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, like I did when I was a player. Now you can practice at 8 p.m. because there's lights and turf, not grass in the sun. So that's become a little bit easier. But also, and I think somebody mentioned this when we were brainstorming this session, some aspects of being a school-based club are way easier because you have an athletic director who takes care of stuff for you. Scheduling refs, buying jerseys, figuring out how you're going to get the team from here to there. Even coordinating field time. If you have an athletic director who is invested, 1,000 times easier than in the club situation.
Bishop Hendricken in Rhode Island is lucky in that the team's been around long enough. They're treated as if they are a regular varsity sport. The kids get letters at the sports banquet at the end of the year, and we get a budget and coaching and fields and all that kind of stuff. We're in the rotation, even though we're not Rhode Island in the Scholastic League, and so that's kind of an embarrassment of riches.
That's awesome. So just sort of continuing with my thought earlier, because I want to hear a yes or a no on this. So Matt, thank you. Actually, that actually brought me a lot of clarity. So let's say that yes, I am a certified coach with USA Rugby, and perhaps I do some other training that I may or may not need for MIAA for the school-based requirements. Am I, as a non-staff member of that school, will they accept me as a coach, or do I need to be staff at that school?
Oh, no, they'll accept you. At Marshfield, I forget how many sports teams we have, 26 or something like that, and I think only like 5 of the head coaches are teachers.
Oh, okay. So you don't even need to be a teacher at a specific high school to be able to coach.
For example, our head soccer coach, his real job is coaching club soccer. Okay. Our head boys lacrosse coach, his real job is coaching boys lacrosse club. Our head hockey coach, his real job is coaching club hockey. Like the model is already there if we look at what schools and clubs in other sports are already doing.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That helps. I didn't know that. I literally thought I needed to be a teacher.
No, and I think if there's candidates there, the school administration would obviously prefer having a teacher because then you're around 100% of the time. You're in the building if there's a discipline issue during the day. Like there's a lot of upside to that, but it's certainly not a requirement in my experience.
And even like a lot of the programs in Massachusetts that belong to belong to a school have a head coach that doesn't work in the school system, but an assistant coach that potentially is a teacher or someone in the district, maybe not even a high school teacher. And something that's that has a benefit to it at the administrative level.
It's a big asset.
Yeah. And so that might be something that makes it easier to start a program. And honestly, just because of like time, as in what time it is right now, we might want to maybe like make that a conversation that we kind of like, because that's a huge conversation. How do we get coaches? Like, what does it take to, because I think you're exactly right. What we've just identified is that it does make a difference to have the adult that stands up and says, I will be there for these kids. That is what a school system needs to hear in order to have a serious conversation about adopting a program, whether it's at the club or the varsity level.
Absolutely vital.
Hey, before we close this topic, I did want to ask Matt something, because he's
Sure.
got a program that's been around for a long time, and Kate too, and I have my own opinion about this, but I just wonder if you could tell me something about how rugby has affected the ethos of the school, because we look at things about school spirit, football teams and basketball teams and some of the big sports that the kids really care about those things.
I would say,
Go ahead.
so I went to Marshfield High School. I was a student there. I grew up there. I live there now, and I teach there now. And I played football, and I wrestled, and I played rugby. Wrestling was my main sport in high school, and wrestling it's a weird sport, and it really, most of the people who really succeeded are weirdos, including myself. Football, I was okay. I was an average player on a bad team, but there was such a macho culture in football. I never felt 100% comfortable there. It was always about who's tougher and like, smaller guy, go get me water. Hey, new kid, carry my helmet. Rookie, get this, do that, and God, I hate that. And I think we all know rugby generally doesn't do that. If you see the memes all the time about there's a spot for everybody. You're short and fat, we get a spot for you. You're skinny and fast, we get a spot for you. Like, there's a spot for everybody. And one of the things I pushed to grow the program, when I took over Marshfield High School, we had 17 kids. 5 years later, we had 50. 3 years after that, we had 70. And one of the things is nobody gets cut. Everybody plays, period. Everybody plays. I mean, I spent a year on the football team where I think I played like in 4 games in the whole year out of 10 or something, because the coaches just didn't care. So I had an administrator not too many years ago tell me that he loves our rugby program. He looks out his window after school and sees us practicing, and he said, honestly, it's a little bit like Rudolph's Island of Misfit Toys, right? And it kind of is. And honestly, that's part of what I love about it so much. I've coached kids who I had coached a kid who had a scholarship to Clemson for football to be a defensive end, decided to play rugby his senior year. And so he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's got all the athletic talent in the world. All right, you're a second row, great. I put him next to this kid who's been playing for me for 4 years and literally has 0.5 out of 10 athletic ability. Knows what he's doing, understands the game, really nice kid, really smart, no athletic talent whatsoever. Also not like a cool, popular kid. He's just a kid who sits in the back of the room and kind of does his thing, versus this other guy who's like Mr. All Everything. By the end of the season, they were so tight. They were buddies. I mean, they still hang out. I think one of them went to the other one's wedding. These kids never would have talked to each other without rugby. And that's part of what I love about it. That I can take kids on hockey scholarships and tell them, hey, this drama kid, he's the one telling you what's up. Do what he says and you're going to be great. And it works. I love it.
Yeah, and I'll agree. I think like we were really fortunate enough as a program to in what was it, 2019? Yes, because we're in 2020. 2019, both of our programs went to the championship game, and I will say that like more teachers showed up to that game in the middle. It was in the summer, like it was a past vacation, right? Like they went down to Stonehill College. These teachers, these kids. We got a fan bus from the school. But it was honestly, to me, it was so telling that so many adults were like, these kids are amazing. They love these programs so much. They're so supportive of rugby. Like this is so much a part of their family. And it's not about ego. It's about like community. that it just made these adults like kind of want to come and cheer for them. And that to me is like when you've made that impression, and it's different from it's different from the impression of perhaps other sports. I think that's a very telling moment, and it happens to be true, I think, in every school in which it's played. There's just something different about rugby.
I could agree. I could not agree more. All right, so in interest in the fact that it is getting late, any last things we want to be able to add to this, or I think we just, or did we just do that?
I think we did. I think we
Yeah.
got it. I mean, I think we've got so much more to talk about,
Oh,
but we
so
can't do it
much
all
more.
tonight.
Yeah, I think we just actually went around the horn without meaning to, and gave our final thoughts. Okay, so let's go ahead and call it an evening, with the understanding that, oh my goodness, we pulled so many topics out of this, and I think we're going to be exploring high school for a while, and particularly. Well, there's so many topics. We'll discuss them as we move forward. So I guess with all that, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll get back.